Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Liu, welcome back to the committee, and thank you for your service. I want to ask a question about something that was included in the budget that appears to relitigate something that we just settled in the fiscal cliff deal, and that is the estate tax. Those were made permanent. Those were provisions that were enacted. It was a bipartisan bill, as you know, a big vote. Nothing else in that particular piece of legislation was relitigated, but we did relitigate the estate tax. And I guess I'm curious as to why the administration felt it necessary to go back to the 2009 parameters when it comes to that, which would lower the exclusion amount from $5 million to $3.5 million, and secondly, would raise the tax rate. And I'm wondering if you're aware what that means, that you'd have roughly triple the number of farms subject to the estate tax and more than double the number of small businesses subject to the estate tax in doing that. And by the way, there was a vote on the budget 2 weeks ago here in the Senate. It got 80 Senate votes, Republican and Democrat, basically stating that the estate tax should either be repealed or reduced. And so I guess my question is, why are we relitigating this after we just made it permanent when it has this kind of an impact on the very people that we want to see creating jobs?
Senator, the estate tax is an issue that has been debated for many years, and it's been adjusted on many occasions. The provision that was in the bill is one that there was no secret. We agreed to it as part of an agreement, but we didn't think it was a very good policy. And so that it is not a surprise that we think the old rates and thresholds are better policy. We also didn't think that it was right to propose a change immediately. A number of provisions are going to be revisited in 5 years, and we thought revisiting the estate tax in 5 years was appropriate. I don't think any of the things we do are permanent in the sense that future tax reform, future tax bills can reconsider them, but every year you shouldn't be reopening things. So we didn't propose anything sudden. There's going to be a debate over tax reform, and we think that in the context of all of the puts and takes and the hard trade-offs, that the estate tax should be part of that. I don't think we agree on the impact on small farms and small businesses, but I would look forward to working with you on that. We certainly don't mean to be creating burdens for small businesses and small farms. I think that it's also not the only issue. There, we thought the refundable credits should have been on the same basis as the estate tax. It was done for 5 years. So, our policy preference, if we were able to just enact a bill on our own, would be for the refundable credits to be permanent and to have a permanent treatment of the estate tax at the levels we've proposed. We understand it's going to take an ongoing discussion, but we think it's entirely consistent with where our view was at the end of last year, and have tried very hard not to make it any kind of a sudden reversal.
Well, and we can debate the impacts, but if you look at what land values have done in places like the Midwest, you got a lot of people that are land rich and cash poor that would be harmed if we went back, and that's why I think it was extended. This was what we agreed to in the 2010 amendments, and then agreed to extend, and I thought we had sort of settled that issue. So I think it's unfortunate that we're trying to come back and review this in light of the impacts that it would have on small businesses and farm and ranch families. One other question I wanted to ask you has to do with, there were a number of things in the budget that, in fact, there were some tax expenditures that were expanded. I don't have the specifics in front of me, but I'm told about $100 billion. There are specific things in which there are taxes raised to fund specific things, and the whole idea of tax reform, in many of our minds at least, was to get away from that in the tax code, to get the rates down, broad-based tax rate reform, lowering of rates, and allow the market more to decide many of those things. And it seems like what you're doing in the budget is heading in the opposite direction. Rather than looking at greater simplification and fewer of these special provisions in the code that are favorable to a specific industry, instead we wanted, we've really been talking about, most of us have at least, I think, getting away from a lot of that and really going to where we have rates reduced, and which I think would benefit all the actors out there in the economy in a way that I think would create jobs and generate economic growth. So tell me a little bit why we're kind of going backwards, in my view, in terms of that approach?
Senator, I guess I would describe it as more as a transition issue. I think we agree on where we want to get to. We want to get to a tax reform discussion where we've broadened the base by eliminating lots of special deductions and credits and lowered the rates so we improve the competitiveness of U.S. businesses and we create growth and more jobs. So I think we agree on that. At the same time, in a world before tax reform, anything we do, we have to pay for it. So I don't think we can say we're accomplishing deficit reduction and then propose things that we say we'll pay for them later out of tax reform. So if we go through this process and we get to the point where we have a fiscal agreement where we agree on an amount of revenue we're going to raise in tax reform, we do business tax reform and individual tax reform, these issues will get resolved in a way that in the future everything would have to be pay-go in our view. Until then, we did think it was important to extend the research and experimentation credit, and we thought we had to pay for it. So I describe it more as a transition issue than as going backwards. If we had not put pay-fors in our budget and we had expansions of either tax or spending programs, then we couldn't say we were hitting our fiscal targets. So we're trying to accomplish two goals. Our driving concern is growth and job creation. We feel we need to get the deficit and the debt to a controllable point. And we've, I think, accomplished both of those goals in the frame of our budget and would look forward to working on a bipartisan basis to get an agreement so we could move forward.
Mr. Chairman, one quick question. Macroeconomic scoring, yeah. Rob Portman offered an amendment to the Senate budget that was approved. Obviously, the budget's probably not going to end up going anywhere, but your thought on whether or not that might not be a good way of looking at many of these policy decisions and the behavioral impacts and whether what they would do to revenues. Yes or no on macroeconomic scoring?
Well, if you'll permit me, it's a little more complicated than yes or no. And Senator, we've discussed this. Senator Portman and I have discussed this. I think that there's a big difference between asking, should we look at an estimate and should we score bills according to that estimate? As I understand the vote that took place in the Senate, it was that there should be scoring of these, what we call dynamic scoring. I think it's a very different proposition to scoring a tax bill that way. And our view is we should use traditional scoring for legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.